In part 1, I explored the main building of the Brestovac Sanatorium, the one that you will encounter first if you're going to it, and I went over a very brief history of the Brestovac Sanatorium. In this video, we're going to see the rest of the Brestovac campus and dive a little bit deeper into the history. As it sits now, the Brestovac Sanatorium looks very spooky, exactly what you would think a haunted, abandoned medical complex deep in the woods would look like. All it's really missing is lightning in the background and a psychotic doctor sewing people together, parts of different bodies together, to create some sort of inhuman monster. Despite the spooky factor, this is actually a semi-popular tourist attraction for people going to Zagreb. And with good reason. Not only is the whole area fascinating, but the story behind the sanitarium is reminiscent of a drama that you would see on a TV show or in a movie or in a play. Not to mention the fact that this was a tuberculosis hospital and a combat hospital for World War I, World War II, and I'm sure it had some use during the Yugoslav wars. This place is probably haunted if you believe in that kind of thing. The Brestovac Sanatorium is the brainchild of a man called Milivoj Dežman. The purpose was to help care for patients suffering from tuberculosis, and it opened its doors in 1909. During that period in history, the mortality rate for tuberculosis was very high, much higher than it is today. Dežman was motivated to build the Brestovac Sanatorium because his current wife, the Croatian actress, I can't pronounce her first name, her last name is Schramm, she had contracted tuberculosis. Dežman had known Schramm since childhood, but they lost touch when they were about teenagers, and he went off to study medicine, and they hadn't really encountered each other until he saw Schramm during a stage performance, as she was an actress, and it sort of rekindled his attraction to her. And Schramm had promised to wait for him until he finished his medical studies and became a doctor. However, that's not quite how it worked out. She ended up marrying some other guy who was the president of a bank, probably in Zagreb. However, the guy that she had married had abruptly disappeared following accusations of embezzlement and mismanagement of funds. So her first marriage had fallen apart, and she did have a child with her first husband. But after all the dust had settled there, Dežman had finally married this woman that he truly loved. However, this new marriage that she was in, and Dežman finally getting to marry the woman that he loved, was marked by tragedy because shortly after they had become married, she had contracted tuberculosis and became seriously ill. So Dežman used his influence to get Brestovac built following her diagnosis. Sadly, at that time, there really was no cure for tuberculosis. There wasn't a whole lot he could really do other than treat her symptoms and raise her quality of life to be as high as it possibly could during this time. But despite his best efforts, in 1913, she died from tuberculosis at the Brestovac Sanatorium. Brestovac Sanatorium was almost the pinnacle of tuberculosis treatment facilities while it was in its heyday. It was renowned throughout Europe. However, as treatments for tuberculosis improved, these kind of tuberculosis sanatoriums were more and more redundant. They weren't needed as much because the mortality rate had dropped quite a bit and there was actually treatment for it. However, during World War I and World War II, since this was already an established hospital, it got used for soldiers and other people who had succumbed to injuries or had received injuries during those two wars. After World War II, the Brestovac Sanatorium was used less and less and less, and eventually, in 1968, it had just become abandoned. And from 1968 onwards, this is what has happened to it. The walls are crumbling, but it still is a very interesting place to go. You can spend hours here. It took us probably 3 or 4 hours to actually explore everything on this campus, and you can definitely tell that nature is taking it back. Ceilings are crumbling, floors are crumbling, and there's trees everywhere. I flew my drone up, and the trees were so thick, all you could see was a little bit of the main building. I didn't even know that these other buildings that we're exploring in this video were here until I got there and started walking around, and it just kept going, and it was actually quite remarkable. It was pretty interesting. I was pleasantly surprised that there was so much to this campus and that it wasn't just the one building. I have read a lot of things about how to get here because I was trying to figure out how I wanted to get here myself. But turns out Uber is plentiful in Zagreb, and it's really inexpensive. So we took an Uber to the little entrance to the sanatorium. And then after we had left the sanatorium, we had hiked down to the Villa Rebar, which I showed in a previous video. And from the Villa Rebar, then we just walked back into the town on the outskirts of Zagreb. We had a beer, had some snacks, and then caught an Uber back to our Airbnb in Zagreb. So it's really not that hard. I think both Ubers might have run us $15 for both. So it really wasn't that bad. I read a lot of things about, you can take this bus and you can do this and you can do this. Just spend the $15, $20, get the Ubers. It'll make your life much, much simpler. Well, that was way bigger than we had expected it to be, but it's actually pretty incredible. I'm glad I got a lot of this on film because, frankly, it doesn't look like it's going to be around too much longer. And it's nice to have a good video record of something historical. So, yeah, if you ever get the chance to come to Croatia, it's definitely worth a trip around if you're into this kind of thing. It's definitely quite spooky. Can't imagine if these walls could talk, but it is what it is. The fact that it's probably haunted as shit.
I wouldn't want to come here at night.
If I was by myself, I told you.
Check it out.
So our time at the Brestovac Sanatorium had come to a close. I'm very thankful that I actually got to see this place. Based on the condition that it's in, I'm really not sure how much longer the Brestovac Sanatorium is going to be around. So if you really want to see it, I would start making a little bit of effort to get there sooner rather than later. Otherwise, you can just keep rewatching this wonderful walkthrough that I made. All right, well, thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.